In this video we are going to install footings or build the foundations for a garden wall. Here are a few pictures of the almost complete wall. I'd just like to point out that I'm not a structural surveyor or a builder, I'm just a guy doing some DIY at home. The existing wall and patio were destroyed in January 2024 when a large tree blew over in a storm. This flattened the garage on the left of the picture and smashed the patio to bits and the wall. This is what the patio looked like before the tree blew over. How to build the wall will be covered in another video. This video just shows how we installed the footings. These steps to the left of the picture have been smashed. The garage was also demolished and the railings and patio and retaining wall were all smashed up. Rather than rebuilding everything as it was, we are going to change the patio to give us a much larger and usable area. The steps are hardly ever used, so they are going to be filled in. I got the garage rebuilt by a couple of mates of mine who are much better at bricklaying than me. If you look at the garage, it is on an angle compared to the house. When we do the footings, we want the wall to be perpendicular to the back of the house, more specifically the conservatory. So to mark out the footings, I measured from each edge of the conservatory and then drew in a straight line. Here is a basic drawing of the house layout. This is the house, conservatory and steps. This is the large garage. This is the smaller garage, which is on an angle. This black line represents the existing garden wall. I've measured from each edge of the conservatory, then marked a line in the garden using grass paint. I have then drawn this line the correct width of the footings. At the corner I used a large roofing square to mark 90 degrees towards the garage, then marked these lines in. Then at the opposite end I used the square again to mark the other end of the wall at 90 degrees. Once the wall is built, it will give us a much larger patio area. Before you start a job like this, it's absolutely critical that you check the weather forecast. You're going to need quite a few dry days in order to get the trench dug and get it filled back in with concrete. A few years ago I dug a trench for a water pipe in a terraced house. The weather changed and it ended up looking like this. So you really do have to be considerate of the weather and ensure that you do this during a dry spell. To save a lot of time and a whole lot of work, I was going to encapsulate the existing wall. Then once my new wall was built, I could fill in the gap using hardcore and crush and run. Unfortunately, whoever built the existing wall had just built the wall on the soil with zero footings. So once the new trench was dug for the new footings, the wall collapsed into the trench. Thankfully nobody was injured, but it just goes to show that you can never assume that the person before you has done a proper job. Keep watching till the end of the video and I'll insert footage of the tree blowing over and the wall collapsing into the trench. Now that we know where the footings need to be, we need to decide how deep they need to be. As stated earlier, I'm not a structural engineer or a builder, so I'm just estimating how big the footings need to be. Obviously they need to be wider than the width of the blocks that I am going to use to build the wall. As for the depth, I'm just going deep enough based on my previous experience of building walls. In 2007 I built this wall from the exact same concrete blocks. This was built on just a 5-inch deep foundation of poured concrete. It's now 2025 and that wall is still standing and has not moved an inch. When I demolished the old brick wall, there were no visible foundations. It had just been built on the clay, pretty much like the original garden wall, which was perfectly fine until the tree hit it. And yes, that is the same cement mixer that I'm using today. I've decided to make the footings at least 2 feet deep. This should be plenty deep enough, and I'm making them at least 18 inches wide, which is twice the width of the blocks. You can see from this picture that the ground is not level. As it is much higher at the right hand side of the picture, this will mean digging the trench much deeper at this side to get the footings level. To dig out the trench, you will need a couple of good digging spades, a wheelbarrow to remove the spoil, and a pickaxe or a mattock to help remove the stones. You may also need a skip, but we are putting the spoil further down the garden, and this will be levelled and turfed over at a later date. A job like this is best done with a couple of people, so I've enlisted my mate Pete to help. He does most of the digging and I do the thinking. Because the wall collapsed into the trench, it meant digging out the trench twice and also removing all of the stones. But this kept Pete busy for a couple of days. We started digging at the lowest point where the trench will be, then continued through at this level. This meant that the trench looks much deeper at the right hand side. It's difficult digging a level trench without specialist equipment such as a theodolite, but we can get the bottom roughly level by using a spirit level. The trench was dug to the correct depth, then I added roughly 10 inches of crush and run. I was going to compact this using the whacker plate, but the vibration would have made more of the patio collapse into the trench. So I just used a punner, sometimes called a tamper. I can now check the level using a laser level and a piece of white hardboard. It's very difficult seeing a laser level outside, especially in the sun, but with the help of a piece of white faced hardboard you can just about see the line. I've put the laser level on the ground and have marked where the laser line is using a marker right next to the laser level. I can now move the piece of hardboard away from the laser and check the marker against the laser line at varying intervals. If the ground is too high, the laser line will be below the mark. If the ground is too low, the laser line will be above the mark. You can add or remove material until the base is somewhere near level. A garden rake is useful as you can use the rake to pull or push the crush and run until you get it level. Once I'm happy with the level, I'm compacting the crush and run down using the punner. If I was to do this job again, I would not bother with the crush and run and would just fill the trench completely with concrete, as there is not a lot of price difference between crush and run and ballast. Now we have the trench dug to the correct depth, we need to add the damp proof membrane. Not everyone does this, but I figured that it won't cause any harm and I had some left over from a previous job. Unfortunately, I forgot to film this bit, but it's just a case of cutting it to the correct width and length and placing it in the trench. The membrane needs to be wider than the trench so that you can hold it in place with bricks, etc. This can be trimmed down once the concrete has set. We are now ready to fill the trench with concrete. Depending on the size of your project, you might be better off getting ready mixed concrete. You can even get firms that will barrow the concrete to the job, or you can even get a concrete pump to pump the concrete to the job. We are doing it the hard way, so we are using my old cement mixer with a stand that I've modified. Then we can tip it directly into the wheelbarrow. I have already made a video on how to mix concrete using ballast, but I'll include it in this video. I have added chapters to this video, so you can skip to the next chapter if you have already seen it. Basically, ballast is sand and aggregates which are pre-mixed together. I've checked online and the concrete experts seem to concur that the strongest mix for concrete is a 8:1 ratio by volume. We are using buckets to measure out the ingredients, so that means 8 buckets of ballast to 1 bucket of cement. Unfortunately, I only have a small cement mixer, so we are using 4 buckets of ballast and half a bucket of cement. Start by switching the cement mixer on and then use some clean water to wet the inside of the drum. This will help to prevent the concrete from sticking to the drum. Now add the 4 buckets full of ballast to the mixer. I'm adding polyester fibres to this mix, but these are optional. Simply mix these in with the ballast. Now add some more water to the mixer. It's critical not to add too much water, as you don't want a sloppy mix, as this can reduce the strength of the concrete. Allow the water and ballast and fibres to mix together for a few minutes. Add some more water if the mix is looking too dry. The important thing when mixing concrete is to use the correct ratio of ingredients by volume and not by weight. Now emptying the cement, you might want to put on a dust mask for this part. You can see that this mix has now dried up, so now we add more water. Remember that you can't take the water out, but you can always add more, so add the water slowly. Pay attention to the back of the mixer just here. If there is concrete stuck to this part, just keep adding a little more water until all the concrete forms a large mixable clump. I should point out that this cement mixer is over 25 years old and is not on the correct stand. Once all the ingredients are in and the mix has been wetted, I'd allow it to mix for at least 5 minutes. A lot of people use a shovel when measuring the ingredients, but that isn't always accurate because the shovel can obviously be heat, etc. So it is much better if you use a bucket or something similar to measure out the ingredients. I always keep a separate bucket for the cement, because if you put the cement in a bucket that's had ballast in that is a little bit damp, the cement will stick to the bucket. Visually check the concrete to ensure that it's all mixed together. You can tell if it's mixed properly as it will have a uniform colour. Once the concrete is mixed, you can tip the mixer into the wheelbarrow. We are using 2 people here as this is not the correct stand for this mixer, but normally this is a one-man job. I highly recommend the Belle wheelbarrow. that I've used for this job. It is superb and it is the best wheelbarrow that I have ever used. But it's not cheap and cost about £280. You can get much cheaper wheelbarrows, but they are cheap for a reason. Now we are ready to start filling the trench. We want to do this job in a single day to give the foundation the maximum strength. For a trench of this size with 2 people, we should easily be finished early afternoon. Peter is doing the mixing and I'm doing the tipping and levelling. I've asked Pete to make the mixes stiff, as I always believed that a stiff mix is required for a strong foundation, which is why they do a slump test when building motorway, bridges, etc. But I've seen some videos online of builders doing really wet mixes that basically find their own level. Anyway, most of the mixes were stiff apart from the last couple, which made it difficult for me to level off. You'll notice that there are some stones holding the damp-proof membrane in position. These will be removed once there is enough concrete in the trench to hold it down. You will need an old rake, a piece of timber for tamping down and a spirit level. It's a good idea to have a large bucket filled with water. Each time you are finished using the rake, just pop it in the water and it will stop the concrete from sticking to the rake. You can't get to all areas to tip the barrow as it needs to be pretty level, so I'm moving the concrete using the back of the rake. You can drag it to wherever you want. The rake can also be used to tamp down the concrete, although for the final tamp a piece of timber and spirit level is best. Tamping the concrete down ensures that there is no trapped air in the mix. If you were doing a big concreting job that was critical, you would normally use a vibrating poker, but this is just a garden wall foundation. We need the top of this concrete to be somewhere near the ground level at the lowest point, which is the left hand corner. It's now just a case of mixing the concrete and pouring it into the trench, then levelling it out with the rake and tamping it down. It's a good idea to put a wooden board close to the trench, otherwise the wheel of the barrow can cause the side of the trench to collapse into the trench. You can also screw a bat into this piece of timber so that you don't push the barrow in too far when tipping. By doing the footings this way, you should be left with a base that is somewhere near level. Because the last few mixes were a bit wet, I did struggle a bit, so it was actually out by about 2 inches from the highest point to the lowest point. But that is over a distance of 6 metres or about 20 feet. This did not cause any problems as I accounted for it by laying the first row of blocks on a thicker bed of mortar. It was a beautiful sunny day when we did this job, so I was worried about the concrete drying out too quickly, so we covered the concrete with whatever we could to prevent the sun shining on it directly. The next day we had a lovely dry slab that would be ready to build on in a few days. There was one more job that needed doing, and that was pouring more concrete at the right hand side of the trench. Because the ground is so high there, it would be impossible to get in there to lay blocks. So I used a piece of laminated chipboard and used some large stones to hold it in place, and I poured a higher foundation. The next day the chipboard was removed and we were left with a neat step up where I could get to lay the blocks. Basically, that is how we created the footings for the wall. If I was to do this job again, I would probably add some rebar to the foundations. I was going to do this but struggled finding the rebar locally. I did buy some rebar with the ballast, but that was for filling in the holes in the blocks once the wall is built. I'll end the video with the video of the tree blowing over and the garden wall collapsing into the trench. I hope you found this video useful. Thanks for watching.